Toll Processing Services is a company out of Pennsylvania that is engaged in the business of toll processing, which is described as performing the steps to process materials to customer specifications. One of their main services that the business participates in is acquiring, constructing, and or operating a pickle line facility. A pickle line is a process that is used to remove impurities from the surface of steel. It is commonly used to descale or clean steel in various steelmaking processes. Toll Processing is a subsidiary of International Steel Services formed for the purpose of owning and operating a pickle line. Castellon is a family-owned business operating since 1963. They are a globally recognized polyurethane manufacturer that provides equipment and repairs for the steel industry. Polyurethane is a super versatile polymer with a wide range of applications. It is appreciated for its durability, flexibility, and toughness. There are many uses for polyurethane, and to list a few, there are foam insulation, sealants and adhesives, coatings and paints, and even foams for mattresses. So in 2006, Toll Processing purchased a used pickle line from Joseph T. Riceran, and it was a pickle line that Castellon had serviced during the time Riceran had owned the line. The pickle line had 57 pickle line rolls, and of those 57, there were a handful that needed to be repaired. So Toll Processing had plans to reinstall the pickle line elsewhere, but as of spring of 2007, they did not have a facility to put it in, so they decided to disassemble the used pickle line, and Castellon actually agreed that they would move the rolls into their facility to hold them at no cost to Toll Processing until a purchase order was issued to recondition the rolls. This agreement was arranged by a woman named Paula Dent. She was a former Riceran employee, and the vice president slash half owner of Castellon, Michael Dement. Upon the discussion of the agreement, there was not a specific time frame discussed, as well as when toll processing would complete and plan to reinstall this pickle line. Castellon then moved the 57 pick rolls into its facility within the first 3 months of 2008. Paula Dent was eventually laid off in April of 2008. Toll Processing did not inform Castellon of this being. So over the next 2 years, Toll Processing was trying to make plans and set up to where they would set up and run the pickle line. They weren't communicating with Castellon about their plans. So after 2 years of storing the rolls in their facility, Castellon had a crew grease up, wrap, and move the rolls to be stored outside under a tarp. 2 years after the last contact between the two companies, Dement had contacted Paula Dent in regards to their plans for the pickle line, which Paula then informed Dement that Paula was no longer employed with Toll Processing. And then after that conversation, Castellon had just assumed that Toll Processing had gone out of business, which brought them to the decision of scrapping the rolls because they thought that they had been abandoned. So in 2011, Toll Processing was close to finalizing their arrangements of reinstalling the pickle line. So the new owner, Gus Skimp, reached out to Dement for a quote on the repair and refurbishment of the rolls so that they could put them into service. Dement then informed Skimp that the rolls had been scrapped, which led Toll Processing to file a 3-count complaint claiming conversion, negligence, and breach of contract. In the dispositions, Toll Processing argues a breach of oral contract by Castellon 2 years after it was made because they moved these rolls where they were allowed to rust. Castellon argues that the alleged contract terms are not sufficient definite because the complaint fails to state precisely when and where the agreement was reached and by whom. They also argue that the absence of the reconditioning purchase order is fatal to the claim. Castellon also argued that the rolls were scrapped because DeMart was under the impression that Toll Processing had abandoned the rolls and had gone out of business. Later at his disposition, Sanders testified, and he agreed that it would have not been reasonable for Toll Processing to expect Castellon to store the rolls forever. So the district court later summary granted to Castellon, finding Castellon had met its duties and to act reasonably in regards to the rolls. The Uniform Commercial Code allows parties to form sales and lease contracts without observing some degree of formality used in formatting of other types of contracts. They came into play when the parties either fail to provide according to their contract or when you want to change the effects of UCC's terms in the contract application. With that being said, under the principles of good faith and sound commercial practice calls for reasonable notification before termination in order to give the other party enough time to seek arrangements. In this case, toll processing versus Calson, there was no specific time or amount discussed, but there was an agreement that Calson would store the rolls. At the end of the day, Calson was not in any trouble or anything for what they did, and it was, in fact, toll processing's fault for not communicating with Castellan.